The fog came from the North Sea like a living thing, dragging itself over the concrete runways of Thorpe Abbotts Air Base, England, on that November morning in 1944. Thick layers of grey-white swallowed the hangars one by one, erasing the outlines of the B-17 Flying Fortress bombers that waited lined up like sleeping giants. The wind carried the smell of aviation oil, burned rubber, and the freezing dampness that penetrated to the bone. Inside the briefing room, 42 men sat in folding metal chairs, nervously smoking cigarettes while they waited. Smoke rose in lazy spirals to the low ceiling, mixing with the tension that hung in the air like static electricity. Nobody spoke. Only the sound of boots dragging on the wooden floor and muffled coughs broke the heavy silence. Captain Robert "Bobby" Sinclair sat in the second row, fingers drumming against his flight pant thigh. 24 years old, angular face marked by sleepless nights, blue eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. He watched the green curtain at the front of the room, knowing what lay behind it, a map of Europe covered by a red line that would indicate the day's target. Bremen, probably. Or Munich. Maybe Berlin again. Beside him, Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Walsh chewed gum with neurotic intensity, his jaw working without stopping. Walsh was Sinclair's co-pilot, a kid from Brooklyn with steady hands and nerves that used to be steel. But that was before they lost the Major. "This fog is worse than yesterday," Walsh murmured without looking at Sinclair. "Can't see the control tower from here." Sinclair didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the curtain, but his mind was thousands of feet in the air, 3 weeks ago, when everything changed. Major Thomas "Tom" McKay, commander of the 351st Bomb Group. 32 years old, veteran of 47 missions, the man who kept all of them alive with instinct, courage, and supernatural calm under fire. McKay wasn't just the squadron leader. He was its heart. When he spoke over the radio, his deep, tranquil voice had the power to calm even the newest pilots during the infernos of flak over the Ruhr. 21 days ago, during a mission over Schweinfurt, McKay's B-17, christened Angels and Demons, was hit by anti-aircraft fire. Sinclair had seen everything from his position 300 feet to the right. The black explosion of flak that tore the right wing, engine number 3 exploding in orange flames, the aircraft entering an uncontrolled dive through the clouds. They called over the radio. Nothing. They looked for parachutes. None opened. Major McKay simply disappeared into the clouds over Germany, taking his crew of 10 men with him. The briefing room door burst open abruptly, and Colonel Harrison entered with precise military steps, followed by the intelligence officer. The murmur of conversation ceased instantly. Harrison was a tall, thin man with a graying mustache and eyes that had already sent too many young men to their deaths. He stopped in front of the curtain, hands clasped behind his back. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade, "today you're going to Ludwigshafen. Synthetic oil refineries. High priority." The curtain was pulled, revealing the map. The red line crossed occupied France, crossed the Rhine, and plunged deep into the industrial heart of Germany. 500 miles there. 500 back. Through the deadliest flak corridor in Europe. "Expect 8 hours of flight time," Harrison continued, pointing to the map with a ruler. 4 hours to target, bombing, return. "You'll have P-51 escort to here," he tapped the ruler on the German border. "Then you're on your own until here." Another point, already in Allied-controlled territory in France. A murmur ran through the room. 2 hours without fighter escort over Germany. Enough time for the Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s to tear the formation apart. Walsh stopped chewing gum. "What about the fog, sir?" someone behind Sinclair asked. Harrison didn't blink. "Meteorology says it'll clear by 0900. Takeoff at 0930. "And if it doesn't clear?" "Then you take off anyway." Harrison's voice was flat, no room for discussion. "This mission can't wait." The Russians are advancing in the east and we need to cut fuel to the panzers before they reinforce the line. Sinclair felt his stomach tighten. Taking off with zero visibility. Forming up in combat inside solid clouds with 50 other heavy aircraft, each carrying 5 tons of bombs. A collision meant 32 men dead in an instant. He'd seen it happen before. 2 B-17s colliding in the middle of fog, disintegrating in a fireball that fell like a murderous shooting star. Who's leading? The question came from Lieutenant Marcus, a rookie pilot on his 5th mission, voice still brittle. Silence. Since Mackay's death, the squadron had flown without a true leader. Harrison had assigned different pilots to command each mission, but none had Mackay's instinct, that almost supernatural perception of when to turn, when to climb, when to dive through the flak. Losses had increased. 3 B-17s shot down last week. 16 men killed. 24 missing. Captain Sinclair will lead the formation. Harrison's voice hit Sinclair like a punch to the stomach. All eyes turned to him. Sinclair swallowed hard, feeling the weight of 42 pairs of eyes on his shoulders. He wasn't Mackay. Didn't have the experience, the age, the calm. He was 24 years old with 5 missions as a wing pilot, never at the tip of the formation. "Sir," he began. "You'll fly Mackay's B-17, Harrison cut him off. "The Angels and Demons was repaired yesterday. New engine, new crew. You take command at 0900. The air left Sinclair's lungs. Fly Mackay's aircraft. The plane that should have saved him but didn't. The plane that now returned from the dead like a ghost. "Yes, sir," was all he could say. Harrison nodded. "Weather briefing at 0830. You have 90 minutes to prepare. Mission is go and return, gentlemen. No dead heroes." "Understood." "Yes, sir," they responded in unison, but the voices sounded hollow. When the room emptied, Sinclair remained seated, staring fixedly at the map. The red line looked like an artery bleeding across Europe. Walsh stayed by his side, not knowing what to say. "Bobby," Walsh began, voice low. "Don't," Sinclair interrupted, standing abruptly. "Don't say anything." He walked out of the room into the fog outside, which was now so dense he could barely see his own feet. Somewhere beyond that white wall, the Angels and Demons waited. A dead man's aircraft. And in a few hours, Sinclair would have to guide 50 bombers through murderous skies, without the slightest idea if he could bring anyone back. The fog seemed to whisper around him, cold and insistent, as if carrying voices of lost men. He closed his eyes. The morning stretched before him like an execution waiting to happen. In the distance, through the thick white curtain, he could hear the muffled sounds of the base coming to life, engines being tested, trucks rumbling past, the metallic clang of bomb carts being wheeled across tarmac. All of it felt distant, dreamlike, as if he were already floating in that space between earth and sky where the dead lingered. Sinclair opened his eyes and looked down at his hands. They were steady. That surprised him. Inside, everything was chaos, a churning storm of doubt, fear, grief for Mackay, terror at the responsibility now crushing down on his shoulders. But his hands didn't shake. Maybe that was all that mattered. Maybe that was enough. A young airman appeared through the fog, barely more than a shadow. "Captain Sinclair?" "Sir, they need you at the aircraft for pre-flight." "I'm coming." But he didn't move. Not yet. He stood there in the fog, breathing the cold English air, feeling the weight of the moment. Somewhere above this gray ceiling, the sun was shining. Somewhere above, the sky was blue and clear and infinite. But down here, in this half-world of mist and metal, men prepared to climb into flying machines and challenge death. And today he would lead them. Walsh appeared beside him again, materializing like a ghost. "Bobby, look. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you're not Mackay. You're thinking you don't have what it takes to bring these guys home. Sinclair said nothing. But here's the thing, Walsh continued, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. McKay didn't start out as McKay. He was scared shitless on his first mission as lead. I know because I asked him once, after about 6 whiskeys. You know what he told me? What? He said the secret isn't not being afraid. The secret is flying anyway. The secret is that every man in that formation is just as scared as you are, and they just need someone to follow. Doesn't matter if you're perfect. Doesn't matter if you're McKay. You just gotta fly the goddamn plane. Sinclair looked at his co-pilot, his friend, and managed something that might have been a smile. When did you get so wise? Brooklyn. Baby. We're born wise. Walsh grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now let's go meet our ghost ship. They walked together through the fog, 2 young men walking toward a dead man's airplane, toward a mission that might kill them, toward a sky that held no promises except violence and chance. The fog swallowed their footsteps. The base around them was invisible, reduced to sounds and shapes without substance. And ahead, somewhere in that white void, the angels and demons waited. The aircraft that should have died but didn't. The ghost that wouldn't rest. V. At 8:45, the fog had not lifted. Sinclair walked along the flight line, boots crushing invisible puddles on the wet asphalt, while the massive shapes of the B-17s emerged and disappeared in the mist like ghost ships. Each aircraft was being prepared by its ground crews, mechanics checking engines, armorers loading belts of .50 caliber ammunition into the turrets, bomb operators adjusting the fuses on 500-pound bombs hanging in the open bays. The sound was deafening even through the fog, engines being warmed up, electrical generators humming, voices shouting orders, the metallic clinking of tools against aluminum. It smelled of 100-octane aviation fuel, hot oil, and nervous sweat. Then he saw her. The angels and demons sat at the head of the runway, separated from the other bombers as if she were radioactive. On the side of the fuselage, just below the pilot's window, the nose art was still there. An angel and a demon in eternal combat, painted in vivid colors that contrasted with the olive-drab metal of the aircraft. But there was something different. The painting seemed more faded, more ghostly in the fog. As if the aircraft itself was divided between 2 worlds. Captain Sinclair? He turned. A young flight sergeant appeared through the fog, holding a clipboard. Couldn't be more than 19, face covered in acne and eyes too wide. I'm Sergeant Collins, your flight engineer, sir. His voice trembled slightly. The aircraft is ready. All systems checked. New engine 3 installed and tested. The crew? Sinclair asked. All new, sir. None of us flew with Major McKay. Collins swallowed hard. They said none of the original crew survived. Sinclair nodded, feeling the weight of that information. 10 men dead. 10 seats now occupied by new faces, kids who had no idea what awaited them. Walsh appeared from nowhere, carrying his maps and navigation equipment. Meteorology is sticking with their forecast. They say the fog will break by 9. Sinclair looked at the sky. He couldn't see beyond 30 feet. And you believe them? No. Walsh didn't lie. But we're not paid to believe, Bobby. We're paid to fly. At 9:15, the fog remained solid as a wall. But the order came over the radio anyway, all crews, board aircraft. Take off in 15 minutes. Sinclair climbed through the ventral hatch of the angels and demons, entering the narrow, claustrophobic belly of the aircraft. The interior smell was familiar. Aluminum, hydraulic fluid, the residual odor of sweat and fear from previous missions. He crawled through the bomb bay, where 8 500-pound bombs hung like deadly eggs, then climbed up to the flight deck. The pilot's seat was still adjusted for McKay. Higher, more reclined. Sinclair sat down and immediately felt like he was occupying someone else's place. like wearing a dead man's uniform. Walsh took the co-pilot position on the right, beginning the pre-flight checklist. Battery on. Fuel 2,500 gallons. Full. Oxygen pressurized and flowing. Through the window, Sinclair saw only white. The control tower was invisible. The other aircraft were phantoms. How the hell would they form up in combat like this? The radio crackled, "Angels and demons, this is Tower. You are cleared to start engines." Sinclair took a deep breath. Starting engine 1. The electric starter groaned. The propeller began to spin slowly. Then the right cyclone engine roared to life with a burst of black smoke. One by one, the 4 engines were started. 2, 3, 4, until the entire aircraft vibrated with 4,800 horsepower roaring. Through the fog, Sinclair could hear other B-17s doing the same. A chorus of mechanical thunder, invisible but unmistakable. Angels and demons, taxi to runway and hold. Sinclair released the brakes and pushed the throttles forward. The aircraft began to roll, heavy with fuel and bombs, yawing slightly to the left as he corrected with the rudder pedals. The fog was so dense he was taxiing blind, guided only by the blue runway lights that appeared as blurred spots every 30 feet. 50 aircraft are going to take off in this soup, Walsh muttered. This is insanity. It's war, Sinclair responded, but his own voice sounded distant. They reached the threshold of runway 24 and stopped. Sinclair applied the brakes, feeling the aircraft shudder with the engines at idle. Through the side window, he couldn't see anything but white. Couldn't see the end of the runway. Couldn't see the sky. If he lifted off and there was another aircraft climbing on the same path. The radio crackled, "Angels and demons, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind 270 at 5 knots. Altimeter 29.92. Good luck, Captain." There was something in the controller's voice. A touch of pity. As if he was sending men to the gallows. "Here we go," Walsh said, tightening his seatbelt until it was tight. Sinclair pushed the throttles all the way forward. The 4 engines roared to their limit, and the angels and demons began to accelerate down the runway. 40 knots. 60 knots. 80 knots. The fog turned into a white blur. Sinclair pulled back slightly on the yoke, feeling the wheels lighten. 100 knots. Takeoff speed. He pulled the yoke back. The wheels left the ground, and they entered the solid fog, climbing blindly toward a sky they couldn't see, carrying 5 tons of explosives and 10 men who trusted that Sinclair knew what he was doing. But he didn't know. The only thing he knew was that he was flying a dead man's plane, in conditions that killed experienced pilots, leading a formation he couldn't see. "Gear up," he ordered. Walsh pulled the landing gear lever. The hydraulic grinding of the tires retracting sounded loud in the cockpit. 200 feet, Walsh announced, eyes fixed on the instruments. 250, 300. The fog didn't lighten. If anything, it got denser. Sinclair kept his eyes glued to the artificial horizon, flying solely by instruments. Rate of climb, 500 feet per minute. Airspeed, 140 knots. Heading, 090 degrees east. Then, without warning, something dark exploded through the fog to the left. "Traffic. 9 o'clock. Walsh shouted. AB-17 emerged from nowhere, so close that Sinclair could see the terrified faces of the pilots through the window. The distance between the wingtips was less than 50 feet. The other bomber was climbing on the same vector, on a collision course. Sinclair shoved the yoke hard to the right. The angels and demons rolled violently, missing by meters. The men in the back screamed as they were thrown against the walls. Jesus Christ! Walsh was white. The other B-17 disappeared into the fog, swallowed as quickly as it had appeared. Sinclair fought to level the aircraft, heart hammering against his ribs. "Everyone okay back there?" The tail gunner's voice came over the intercom, tense. "Yes, sir. But barely." They continued climbing. 1,000 feet. 2,000 feet. The fog continued, endless. Sinclair began to think they would climb forever, that they would never find the sky, that this would be the mission that simply disappeared into a white limbo between earth and heaven. Then, at 3,200 feet, it happened. They burst through the top of the fog into a completely different world. Brilliant sunshine. Impossibly blue sky. And below them, an infinite layer of white clouds stretching to the horizon like a frozen ocean. And emerging from that layer, one by one, like whales surfacing, the other B-17s. "My God," Walsh whispered. It was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. 50 bombers rising through the clouds, wings gleaming in the sun, each trying to find their position in the formation while flying at 300 miles per hour in all directions. The radio exploded in voices. "Blue Leader, where the hell are you? Does anyone see Red 3? I've got an aircraft on my tail. Who is it? Controlled chaos. Or just chaos?" Sinclair pressed the transmit button. "This is Angels and Demons to all elements. Form on me. Heading 095, altitude 10,000 feet. Repeat, form on Angels and Demons." He banked the wings and began a wide turn, giving time for the other bombers to find him. Slowly, painfully, the formation began to materialize. B-17s sliding into position, creating the combat box, a defensive formation where the gunners on each aircraft could support each other against enemy fighters. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of pure tension as heavy aircraft danced inches from each other, avoiding collisions by reflex and luck. But when they finished, the sight was majestic. 50 flying fortresses in perfect formation, engines roaring in unison, heading east toward Germany. Sinclair let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Well done, Bobby," Walsh said quietly. But Sinclair didn't feel good. He felt like someone else was guiding his movements. Like invisible hands had helped form the formation. A calm, experienced presence. Impossible, of course. But he couldn't shake the feeling. The intercom crackled. It was Collins, the flight engineer. "Captain, Sergeant Miller up in the top turret says that—" "Well, sir, he says he saw something strange during the climb." "What?" Hesitation. "He says he saw another aircraft flying right behind us in the fog. Real close. But when we got above the clouds, it disappeared. It's not in the formation." Silence in the cockpit. Walsh looked at Sinclair. Probably disoriented. Easy to see things in the fog. "Yeah," Sinclair agreed, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. "Probably." He adjusted the heading to 090 degrees. Ahead, beyond the horizon, Germany waited. And with it, 500 miles of murderous sky. The formation leveled off at 10,000 feet and began the long cruise toward enemy territory. Inside the Angels and Demons, the crew settled into their positions. The waist gunners stood by their .50 caliber machine guns, scanning the sky through the open windows. The ball turret gunner squeezed into his cramped sphere beneath the aircraft. The tail gunner sat alone at the very back, the loneliest position on the plane, watching behind them for fighters that would come screaming out of the sun. Sinclair checked his watch. 10:03. They would cross into France in 27 minutes. Germany 45 minutes after that. Target time, 13:15. The numbers ticked through his mind like a metronome counting down to violence. "How you feeling?" Walsh asked, not taking his eyes off his navigation charts. "Like I'm flying a dead man's plane toward my own funeral." "Well, at least you're honest." Walsh marked their position on the map with a pencil. "We're making good time. Tailwind at altitude. Might even beat the weather forecast to target." Sinclair nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the voice Collins had mentioned, the report of another aircraft flying close in the fog. It should have been impossible to miss during the formation assembly. Every plane was accounted for. 50 bombers, all visible now in their combat box, spread across 3 miles of sky. So what had Miller seen? The rational part of Sinclair's brain provided easy answers. Optical illusion, shadows in the fog, another cruise aircraft that had since found its position. But the irrational part, the part that had grown stronger since Mackay's death, the part that had learned to listen to instinct in a world where death came at 400 miles per hour, that part whispered something else. "You're not alone." He shook his head, trying to clear the thought. Focus. The mission. That's all that mattered. At 10:30, they crossed the French coast. The English Channel passed below, grey and churning, and then they were over occupied Europe. The landscape changed. Patchwork fields, villages, roads, all scarred by years of war. Bomb craters pockmarked the countryside. Destroyed bridges. Burned forests. The evidence of total war stretched as far as the eye could see. "Friendly territory," Walsh announced. "French resistance controls this region. If anyone goes down here, they've got a chance." If that word carried so much weight. If the plane didn't explode on impact. If the crew got out. If they didn't land in the middle of a German patrol. If the resistance found them before the Gestapo did. Too many ifs. Sinclair preferred not to think about going down. Preferred to focus on staying up, staying alive, getting everyone home. At 10:58, the P-51 Mustang escorts arrived, just as briefed. Sinclair saw them first, silver glints high and to the south, dropping down to formation altitude. 12 beautiful fighters, each one painted with distinctive checkered patterns on their noses and tails. The 357th Fighter Group out of Leiston. The lead P-51 waggled its wings as it passed the angels and demons. A greeting. A promise of protection. Sinclair waggled back. For the next 40 minutes, the Mustangs flew protective patterns around the bomber formation, weaving in and out, covering high and low, scanning for German fighters. Their presence was psychological as much as practical. Just knowing those lethal little fighters were up there made everyone breathe a little easier. But it couldn't last. At 11:41, exactly as Harrison had marked on the map, the P-51s broke away. Their fuel tanks were running low. They had to turn back or risk not making it home themselves. The lead Mustang pilot came on the radio one last time. "This is checkmate leader to bomber stream. We're at bingo fuel. Turning for home. Good hunting, gentlemen. Give 'em hell. Thanks for the escort, checkmate. See you on the other side." The Mustangs banked sharply to the west, their engines screaming as they accelerated away, racing the fuel gauge back to England. And then the bombers were alone. The sky suddenly felt bigger. Emptier. More dangerous. Sinclair could feel the change in his cruise tension, transmitted through the intercom like an electric current. The gunners' voices became sharper, more frequent. Clear left. Clear right. Clear high. Clear low. For now. The border between France and Germany was approaching, marked on the map by the Rhine River. Beyond that river, the Third Reich. Beyond that river, hell. Walsh pointed ahead through the windscreen. There. See it? A silver ribbon on the horizon. The Rhine. The line between relative safety and absolute danger. They crossed at 12:07. The moment they entered German airspace, every man in the formation knew it. It wasn't something you could see or hear. It was something you felt. A tightening in the chest. A tingling in the fingertips. The primal animal instinct that you were now in the predator's territory. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. The landscape below was industrial now. Factories, rail yards, Towns clustered around rivers and roads. Smoke rose from chimneys. Cars moved on streets. Normal life, somehow continuing even as 1,000 tons of bombers flew overhead. Then, at 12:12, the first flak burst appeared.